The ranch lay under a sky that felt too wide and too watchful, the kind of sky that made men lower their voices without knowing why, and Eli Mercer had lived beneath it long enough to believe the land remembered everything done upon it, every boot print and broken promise, every scream swallowed by the wind, which was why he had nailed the warning sign himself. Don't look down there. That's off-limits hammering, each rusted nail with a fury that startled the hired hands, because the ravine beyond the south fence was not just a cut in the earth but a wound, a place where the ground fell, away so sharply that the shadows pooled like ink in the air, smelled damp even in summer, and everyone on the ranch knew not to go near it. Not because Eli said so, but because animals refused to cross that line, horses shied and cattle bawled, and birds never nested in the crooked, trees that clung to the edge like desperate fingers. Eli told himself the sign was enough, that the land would keep its silence if he kept his rules. But secrets have weight, and weight pulls downward, and that morning the weight pressed harder than ever, because the new hand, Caleb, young and curious, and too polite to ask the right questions, had noticed the sign and asked the wrong ones, and Eli had felt the old anger rise hot and quick, warning him that curiosity was a spark near dry grass. He snapped at the boy, told him to mind the fences and not his business, yet all day he felt eyes on the south fence, as if the ravine itself were watching him back. And when dusk came, and the cattle were counted and the sky turned the color of bruised peaches, Eli found himself walking alone, boots crunching on gravel, every step taking him closer to the place he swore he would never visit again, because he had looked down there once before, years ago, and the memory had gnawed at him ever since, a memory of a night when the rain came sudden and loud and the creek roared, like a living thing, and choices were made too fast to take back. The wind rose as he reached the fence, rattling the sign so the words clacked together like teeth, and he stood there longer than he meant to, telling himself he was only checking the posts, only making sure the warning still stood. But the truth was simpler and worse. He needed to know if the land still kept what he had given it, if the ravine still held the answer to a question he had never dared ask aloud. The fence wire was cold against his palm as he leaned forward, and the earth beneath his boots felt unsteady, as if it remembered him too, and when he finally looked, when he broke his own rule and let his eyes travel past the edge, the darkness below seemed to stir, a slow, terrible stirring that made his stomach drop, because the ravine was not empty, not the way it should have been, and something pale caught the dying light far below, something that did not belong to rock or root or bone of the land, and Eli felt the past surge up like floodwater, carrying with it the sound of a woman's voice from years ago pleading, and a promise he had made to keep everyone safe by doing one unforgivable thing. His breath came shallow as he scanned the shadows, heart hammering, mind racing through the careful lies he had built, about accidents, about storms, about how the land takes what it wants. But the ravine answered with a silence that felt like judgment, and in that silence Eli understood that the secret was no longer content to sleep, that curiosity had reached it at last, and that if anyone else looked down there, the ranch would become a graveyard of truths he could not bury. A shout drifted from the yard then, Caleb's voice calling for him, bright and unworried, and the sound sliced through Eli's thoughts, forcing a decision he had been avoiding for years, because the horrifying thing was not what lay in the ravine, but what he knew he must do to keep it hidden. And as he straightened, wiping sweat from his brow, the plan formed with a clarity that chilled him more than the night air. He would fix this the way he had before, quickly, decisively, before the land demanded its due in a louder way. He turned from the fence and started back toward the lights of the house, the sign clattering behind him like a warning he had ignored, and with every step his resolve hardened. Because some men protect their land with fences and laws, but others protect it with silence and fear, and Eli Mercer had already crossed the line once, long ago, and crossing it again felt terrifyingly easy. If this story has pulled you into its shadows and made your heart beat a little faster, stay with us, subscribe now, and turn on notifications, because what Eli saw in the ravine is only the beginning, and in the next part the land will demand a price no one is ready to pay. The time Eli reached the house, the windows glowed warm and ordinary, the kind of light that pretended nothing was wrong, and for a moment he stood on the porch listening to the low murmur of voices inside, the clink of dishes, the normal sounds of a ranch winding down for the night, and the normality almost broke him, because it reminded him of how carefully he had stitched this life together. Over the years, how every smile and handshake rested on the unspoken agreement that no one would ever look too closely at the land he ruled. He stepped inside and found Caleb at the table, dust-streaked and eager, talking too fast about a loose gate and a calf that had wandered, and Eli nodded in all the right places, while his mind replayed the pale shape in the ravine, turning it over like a blade in his thoughts, knowing with a sick certainty that it hadn't been there before, that something had shifted, been uncovered, or dragged closer to the surface by time and weather and chance. After supper, Eli sent everyone to bed early, claiming a long drive at dawn, and when the house finally fell quiet, he moved through it like a ghost, gathering what he needed without turning on a single light: rope, tarp, shovel, each object carrying the echo of the last time he had done this. The way his hands had shaken then, too. The way he had told himself there was no other choice. Outside, the night pressed close, thick with the smell of sage and damp earth, and the moon hung low, casting long shadows that pointed accusingly toward the south fence. And Eli's boots seemed louder now. Every crunch of gravel a confession, every breath a countdown. Yet no one stirred, and the ranch slept on, ignorant and trusting. At the ravine's edge, the wind dropped suddenly, as if the land itself were holding its breath. And Eli crouched, peering down again, forcing himself to see clearly this time, to confirm what his gut already knew, and there it was, unmistakable now, a scrap of fabric tangled among the rocks, bleached and frayed, the same pattern he had sworn he would never see again, proof that the past was not only alive but reaching upward. Anger flared then, sharp enough to cut through the fear, anger at storms and erosion and careless fate, anger at the boy for asking questions, anger at himself for believing secrets stayed buried forever, and with that anger came resolve, cold and efficient, because Eli Mercer survived by solving problems before they grew teeth. He set to work, lowering himself carefully, muscles screaming as loose stones skittered into the dark, and every foot of descent felt like sinking back into the night he had tried to forget, the rain slicking his hair, the woman's sobs turning to silence, the promise whispered to no one that it would be over soon. The ravine smelled of rot and water, and when his boots finally touched the bottom, the earth felt soft, disturbingly so, and as he knelt to free the fabric, his hand brushed something that made him recoil. Something smooth and unmistakably human, and for a long second he could not breathe, could not move, because the horrifying truth was worse than he'd imagined. The land had not swallowed everything, had not erased the evidence the way he'd prayed it would, and now it was offering it back. Above him a pebble dislodged and fell, then another, and Eli froze, heart slamming, convinced someone had followed him, but the sound stopped, leaving only the whisper of water and his own ragged breaths, and he knew time was running out. That dawn would come, and with it eyes and questions and consequences he could not outrun. He worked faster, hands numb, thoughts narrowing to the simple, brutal logic that had guided him before. Finish this. Make it disappear again. Protect the ranch at any cost. And as he hauled the tarp into place and tightened the rope, a terrible calm settled over him, the calm of a man who has accepted what he is. When he finally climbed back up, sweat-soaked and shaking, the moon had slipped behind clouds, and the ravine looked empty once more. Innocent even, but Eli knew better, knew the land would remember, and that memory would find another way to surface, because secrets rot from the inside out. He hid the tools, scrubbed his hands raw, and stood in the dark yard until his breathing steadied, telling himself it was done, that no one would ever know. Yet as he turned toward the house, a shape moved near the fence, and a voice, Caleb's, cut through the night, soft but unmistakable, saying, "Sir, what's down there?" And in that instant Eli understood that the truly horrifying thing was not what he had just done, but what he was about to do next to keep the truth buried. If this story has you gripping the edge of your seat, don't stop now. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because Chapter 2 will reveal what happens when curiosity meets a secret that refuses to stay hidden, and the land finally demands its full price. Morning light exposed what the night had hidden, And Eli Mercer knew the ranch would never feel quiet again. Because Caleb's question had cracked something open that fear alone could not seal. Eli brushed him off with a sharp warning, but the boy's eyes carried doubt. And doubt spreads faster than truth, creeping through the ranch like rot beneath clean wood. And by noon the hands were watching the south fence more than their work. Clouds gathered, heavy and familiar, and Eli felt the past tightening its grip, reminding him that storms had always been witnesses to his worst decisions. So when rain began to fall, he acted fast, telling the men the ravine was collapsing and must be buried for safety. A lie smooth enough to pass until the land itself refused to cooperate. The earth gave way with a sickening crack, revealing what should never have surfaced. And in that frozen moment, Eli understood there was no fixing this anymore. No deeper hole to dig, no stronger warning to nail up. So he stepped forward and confessed, his voice breaking under the weight of years of silence, admitting what he had done long ago in the name of protection and fear. The ranch stood still as rain washed the dust from everything, including Eli's lies, and when authorities arrived, the land felt lighter, as if relieved to finally tell its story. Eli left in cuffs not as a rancher, but as a man finally seen, while Caleb watched, learning that some rules exist not to control curiosity, but to hide the cost of ignoring truth. The ravine was sealed again, this time as a marker, not a secret, and the warning sign became a lesson, whispered for years, that what you bury alive will always find a way back. If this story moved you, shocked you, or stayed in your thoughts, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because more dark, unforgettable stories are coming, and you won't want to miss what's next.